ego death is not the end of thinking. It is the end of reaction to thinking that is the food of parasitic thought forms. It is the end of being parasitized by thought forms. And the beginning of a life in abundance. But that abundance is of an inner nature, in the perception of a peace and bliss that goes beyond the product of all to which the voice in the head can point. Parasitization is in the reaction to threat. A threat to that with which there is identification. So the cultivation of identification with impermanent things, be they subtle or gross, is the foundation of vulnerability to parasitism at the hands of thought forms that get inflated with the energy that follows attention. And that energy gets transmuted to the vibration of those thought forms, which is a function of the distance between reality and the ideal that they represent. The sum of these thought forms, each with their own conditional vibrational level, could be likened to a bundle of grapes enveloping the spiritual heart, each grape with its own vibration that can change relative to how circumstance accommodates its ideal. So things could be going well for some percentage of those grapes, while things are going poorly for another percentage. So for example, your personal circumstance could be ideal, but then the condition of your political allegiances, or those things to which there's allegiance politically, it could be going very poorly for them. And so the average of these different vibrations held by the grapes in one's egoic structure determines the overall average vibration of the thought forms with which there's identification by virtue of their relationship to the subject of thoughts, predicated on belief in being the subject of thoughts, which is represented by different forms, both subtle and gross, the mental, physical, and ethereal bodies. And so the energy that follows attention, it's reflected back to the awareness you are, which is no form, after its transmutation by these thought forms, these grapes that get it. This determines one's state of being. And when the distance of reality from the average ideal of the thought forms becomes greater, then the state of being is descendant. It goes down. The vibrational level descends. And then when reality changes to be closer to the ideal, then the vibrational level of the being increases. So there is no stability in one's state of being in identification with ideas that can be countervailed and forms that can be threatened and ultimately destroyed. So liberation is not the end of the existence of these forms, but rather the end of belief in being the subject to which they relate in a way that disconnects their proximity or their ideal's proximity from reality from one's state of being. So whereas the energy that follows attention is reflected back into awareness at the vibrational level held by these thought forms due to their ideal's proximity to circumstance, in the absence of that reaction, there is a stillness of heart. So rather than giving attention to those thoughts, the subject of which holds the mantle of self in the state of ignorance, it is instead given to the spiritual heart, into which the I, that is the root of the egoic structure, has receded in surrender to its source that is now still like a mirror that palpably reflects love. There is no freedom in dealing with each grape individually, as it will be replaced by another, as the green leaves of a weed, in trying to kill it by cutting from the top down. But rather, the liberation is in the end of identification with the I itself, that is the root of that whole structure and the relational agent that facilitates reaction. The I is surrendered back to its source, which is the spiritual heart. And then the balloons, or the grapes, the bundle of thoughts growing from the I and the form it represents, are set free. And in their wake, attention can be given directly to the spiritual heart in the midst of you, which without the relational agent I to bring disturbance to it is rendered completely still as a mirror. And the energy that follows the headwaters of attention, that by default, without augmentation from reflection in the ego, its vibrational level is love and is reflected as such in the stillness of the spiritual heart, a palpable reflection. And that perception of unconditional love eclipses all to which the thought forms can point as a reward. And in this is a life in abundance. So in a sense, it is the end of the self, but it's not, as I've said before, an anhedonia. It's not a deadness, but rather a freedom. And there is a danger in being completely rudderless in this, in losing the witness, in gaining the insanity that accompanies a total absence of purpose. Rather, it's possible to return to the normal trappings of life, but to do so without the tax imposed by the parasites that coax reactions to steal one's energy, in the ignorance that causes belief in being the subject to which they relate, which gives them the power to transmute it to the suffering on which they feed. So there is an absence of tension. There is an absence of seriousness. The 11 that appears between the eyes is gone in such an individual. It's like this absence of tension is like Botox. You can see it in the face. The face stops unconsciously crinkling. They say by the time you're middle-aged, you've got the face that you deserve. The reactions of the ego are reflected in the face and in the impressions, the long-term impressions therein. But when there's no identification with thought and form, but rather a liberation from that allows the perceiving of one's own energetic inheritance reflected in the stillness of the spiritual heart, there's a palpable peace that radiates from the midst of you. And in that, the muscles in the face and the fascia itself are perpetually relieved of tension. Don't let anyone who doesn't know better sell you on the idea of liberation being anything less than that. And at the same time, don't fall victim to the trap of grandiosity, of believing oneself to be the chosen one, as that is the final trick of the ego, of the parasite. And that's all for now.